Ladies and gentlemen, a situation was just brought to my attention as I was watching this week's edition of the Weekly Reset by Taliesin and Evitel. I'm going to be linking this in the description of this video. If you guys don't keep up with the Weekly Reset, this is a show where Taliesin and Evitel report the happenings around World of Warcraft. I enjoy watching it. I think it's entertaining. I know that a lot of people consider that Taliesin is exceedingly positive whenever it comes to reporting on WoW news, but the reality is Taliesin still greatly enjoys the game, and I can relate to that. There's been plenty of times where I've enjoyed a video game that a lot of people did not enjoy, and therefore I still wanted to create positive content on it, and a lot of people kind of like were upset at me about it. But anyway, in today's episode, Taliesin touched up on a particularly important topic that I always like to talk about, which is the topic of gearing. Now, apparently, there are these activities that you can do out in the open world. I watched the video from Preach on this a while back. I didn't really react to it. I just kind of like watched it. And he talked about how there's these things that happen out in the open world, these events that kind of take place. And as you complete these events, you gain this special currency that then enables you to buy gear that kind of serves almost as a bridge, from my understanding, between heroic dungeon gear or maybe even mythic 0 dungeon gear and raiding gear, kind of like a bridge the gap there. Or if you happen to be an open world player, this is going to be something that is going to give you gear, which I believe, according to Taliesin, is somewhere close to looking for raid, something along those lines. And I was like, oh, this is like a cool solution where a player can go into the open world and grind some stuff and just get some starter level gear, which then they can take into, raiding and Mythic Plus and all of that stuff. Now, before we cover this particular topic, it is important to mention that the game is obviously in beta. This is not something that is set in stone, but the most important part for me is always what is the intent behind some of the changes that they're making on both the alpha and the beta. Because you can usually tell a lot about, a developer's intent whenever they do some changes. Then you have to consider, why was this change made? Why are you testing this? Are you testing to see if people are going to accept this? Are you testing to see if people are going to be upset with this? Are you testing to see, how low can you go with this content? So, but without any further ado, just be aware, this is something that you can get in the open world by doing some special events that are going to take place in the Dragon Isles. And as you complete these events, you're going to be given a currency, which then allows you to buy this gear. So let's see about this change that has been happening. I'm going to play a portion of the clip. Like I said, you should watch the whole thing if you want to, if you're interested in it, because personally, I like watching it. You should check it out yourself. If you enjoy World of Warcraft content, this might be up your alley. It might not. So let's see.
Talk about storm scale gear.
Storm scale gear.
So last week we told you about the open world storm scale seal gearing option, where you complete primalist invasions for up to 4 storm scale sigils a week for almost normal.
So an important, an instantly important thing to talk about. You can get 4 of these a week. Now, like I also said, this is in the beta stages of development, and this is another reason why I want to make this video, because I kind of feel like in the beta stages of development is most definitely when you want to be giving developers feedback whenever it comes to this type of stuff. So you can get 4 of them a week. I'm going to back away a little bit so that Taliesin can describe the gear a little bit better.
For up to 4 storm scale sigils a week for almost normal raid level gear and
almost normal raid level gear.
Overflow, which is infinitely farmable and awards almost LFR level starter gear.
Okay, so Elemental Overflow, infinitely farmable. You can get as much as you want. The other stuff, which is almost normal raid gear, so it's not even normal raid gear, you can only get 4 of the currency for.
I guess it's meant to work as a long-term gearing option for solo players who don't raid or dungeon, and a low-level basic bad luck protection for everyone else. Because it took about 70-odd storm sigils to get the whole 395 set, which is like 17 or 18 weeks of farming.
You see where the problem is? 17 or 18 weeks of farming. This is how it used to be, apparently.
That has changed on the beta this week, and like so much in the new crowd-pleasing age of WoW, I am happy to report it is now a lot quicker and a lot easier to attain those storm sigils and get that gear. And if that makes you happy, then psych, because I lied. It's actually much longer and harder to get the gear, so f you, f you for being happy. On the alpha right now, the blue elemental overflow gear still costs the same amount of elemental overflow to buy, but each piece now also costs a single storm scale seal on top.
Single storm scale. So the seal that you can only get like once a week. Now it is important to mention once again, this is like not even normal rating gear. They're limiting you on this not even normal rating gear. The amount of gear that you can acquire on a weekly basis. This gear, I believe, is probably comparable, if you go to Final Fantasy XIV, would be comparable to the gear that we can usually get for the tomes that are not capped. If you guys are aware of how that particular system works. We have like a system where we have a bunch of tomes that we can get where there's no actual cap to it, and there's like a gear set that you can get out of those. This would be what I would equivalent to that, this blue stuff. The almost raid level gear, it's like, I don't even think that is like regular limited tomestones, because there's also, limited tomestones that we get on a weekly basis, because there's unlimited tomestones and there's this limited amount of tomestones. Think of it almost as like the old heroic and valor badges back in the Wrath of the Lich King days. Well, I say back in the Wrath Lich King days. Those days are now, but yeah.
Of that. And the purple 395 storm scale gear now needs players to already own the blue elemental overflow version of the gear.
So first you need to buy the crappier version of the gear, and then you're going to upgrade it using the tokens. Now, the thing that instantly bothers me, for starters, he said it's going to take you anywhere from like 18 to 19 weeks in the old system. So now it takes longer. I don't remember if you actually did the calculation for how long it takes now. But even in the old system, it would take you like 4 months to gear up with entry-level gear? How does this even make sense? 4 months for entry-level gear? This makes no sense whatsoever for me. Like, I'm just saying, like, for starters, it's like, look, do I actually have to justify this? Do I need to justify why I think that, actually it's not even 4 months, it's more, it's like whatever, it's almost 5. But do I actually need to justify why I kind of feel like this is a bad thing? I don't think I do. I just think that 4+ months for trying to gear up on entry level gear is insanity. Most people are just going to funnel into Mythic Zeros. Are you crazy? Like, who's going to do this? Anyway, let's continue.
To purchase it, and the price of every one of those storm scale items has gone up, sometimes to over double the amount of
so these are the new prices, and they're way more expensive than what they used to be. Okay, because I was like, this doesn't seem right. So to give you guys an idea, right, just to get these wrists, let's even just ignore the requirement of the previous piece of gear. Okay, let's just call that one a freebie. We'll just give that one away for free. Let's just look at what it would be like if you just needed to grab these yellow things, the storm scale, whatever, sigils, or whatever they're called. These wrists would take 3 weeks to get. For a pair of wrists. I want you to let that sink in. You want to know how many wrists I can get on the first week of a normal raid in Final Fantasy XIV, which normal raids are fairly easy to do due to the fact that it's just easier to organize normal raids when it comes to 14. You know how many wrists I can get day one? If I wanted to, on the very first day of raiding, I could get 4 wrists. No joke. I mean, you wouldn't want to get 4 wrists because who wants that? But instead, I could get earrings, wrists, neck, and ring. 1 ring, because you need 2 rings. So I could get 4 pieces of gear in the first week, as opposed to getting 1 piece of gear in 4 weeks. Here's the interesting thing. I didn't even realize that that's what it was going to boil down to. I didn't think this through before I started making this analogy. Oh my God. Now, of course, depending on the piece of gear that you want to get, it's going to be a little bit more limiting. So say, for instance, you want to get the raid chest. That is going to require 4 tokens, so you're only going to be able to get the raid chest. But the chest is like one of the most important pieces, right? So it's like that whole thing can get like your chest on the first week. But still, I mean, come on, bro. 4 weeks for a pair of wrists? 4 weeks for a cloak? Well, what is this? This is shoulder pads? Okay, on the shoulder pads, a little bit easier. It only needs like 2 weeks and change for the shoulder pads. Dude, the 9 ones are the ones that hurt the most. Because like you can have 2 weeks worth of farm, and then you're missing 1 sigil to upgrade your shoulders. Like that is ridiculous. I mean, come on, dude. Who thought of this? Now, again, like I said, this is beta, so this can change and hopefully will change because this is completely unreasonable. Like I said, most people are just going to end up doing Mythic 0, whether they like it or not. See, here's the thing. You're trying to give people an alternative. At least that's what I'm assuming this gear system is, and that's kind of like how Taliesin described it. You're trying to give people an alternative to gearing up so that they don't feel forced to do things that they don't want to do, because a lot of players don't want to engage in Mythic Plus, even though that is one of the activities that I personally like to do a lot in World of Warcraft. A lot of players do not want to engage in Mythic Plus. A lot of players do not want to engage in raiding, and your solution is like, okay, we're going to give you this different kind of like system that you can go through that is going to be a little bit more accessible, and it is going to, allow you to do this thing on your own schedule and all of that. But we're going to limit it so hard that it's going to take you multiple months for you to gear up your character and what is essentially below mediocre gear. How is this reasonable in any way, shape, or form? It's completely and utterly unreasonable. Like, what are you doing? Give the people gear. And this is where I want to bring up another topic of discussion where there's always this idea, for some strange reason in World of Warcraft, there's always this idea that comes up. And I talked about this on the podcast. I'll probably talk about it in the future as well, where a lot of players seem to have this misguided notion that it's like, well, if you finish gearing up your character, you're going to quit playing the game. What? Who does that? Who actually gears up a character and then stops playing the game? How does that make any fucking sense? When I gear up the character is when I'm the most motivated to play the game because like, hey, I have the gear, now let's do all the challenging things. Like, what do you mean? Who gears up a character and then quits? And here's the interesting thing. If somebody just happens to gear up their main character, they're like, hey, I finished gearing up my character. Guess what they're probably going to do? Due to the fact that Blizzard is hopefully not going to be limiting the way that people engage with alts in this expansion, they're going to be like, hey, I get to gear up another character. I get to do it again. Because there's a lot of players that love playing alts. So I really don't understand, because the weirdest part about this is how there's a ton of players that will usually defend Blizzard withholding gear as a good thing. It's like, no, you got to work for it. You got to work. It's like, bro, it's a different thing if you're talking about rating and all of these things, but it's like you're talking about less than entry-level gear. I can't wait to see people try to defend this. This is going to be hilarious.
Storm scale seals, except weirdly for the hat, which is now cheaper. So to purchase the entire 395 set now costs considerably more storm scale seals than it did before, but of course you can still only get 4 a week with no catch up, which severely nerfs how attainable and therefore how useful this gear is. Because
remember, it is entry level gear.
Of early low-level gear, its usefulness doesn't come from its unremarkable item level so much as it does from the relative ease or speed of its acquisition. Like, that's why the class order hall sets in Legion weren't very useful at all from a gearing perspective. If you'd been able to access it a couple of weeks into the expansion, it would have been genuinely useful to a lot of players for a while, but with the way it was time-gated, by the time you'd collected the set, it was months into the expansion and you naturally already had much better gear.
Which is the case here as well.
Seems like a strange decision to me, since I considered last week's version of those prices pretty much on the cusp of usefulness.
Yeah,
anyway.
So last week we were talking about already like upwards of more than 4 months for you to gear up with this, again, entry-level, below mediocre gear. So now they're increasing how long it's going to take for that. I mean, my suspicion is that this is probably going to also come because currently in the beta, this stuff is not dropping. So my suspicion is that potentially, and again, the suspicion of my optimist side would be that Blizzard might potentially be increasing the amount of these Storm Seal sigils that you can gather every week. Maybe. But even then, it feels incredibly prohibitive unless they're... Here's the way in which I find that this would actually be somewhat useful would be if Blizzard just goes, okay, there's no cap on Stormseal sigils. Because if you even look at it, even without it having a cap, let's assume that you can get one of these sigils per each of the events that you do, right? Let me just grab the price. Okay, so let's assume, and again, this is a big assumption. Let's assume that you can get one of these sigils for each of these events that you do. It is going to take you 13 of these events to get a pair of entry-level bracers. 13! Because you have to take into account the previous one, which is also going to include the blue currency, and that's assuming that it's going to drop loads and loads of the blue currency so that you can buy the other item, and then, it's still 13 things. It's still, even if this was uncapped, I think that this is still way too low, because you have to do so many events to get I'm assuming it's one sigil per event, because apparently they're not currently dropping in the game. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you guys think about this? How do you feel about, because this could represent Blizzard's intentions towards gearing overall in the expansion. That's the way that I personally look at it. Like, how generous are they going to be with loot in Mythic Plus? How generous are they going to be with loot in rating? Because if this is how they're going to treat the loot that, like I said, and let me repeat that, this is below mediocre level gear. This is barely entry-level gear. And if this is the way in which they're going to dole it out, I can only imagine what gearing is going to be like for like Mythic Plus, Mythic Zero, all of that stuff. But as per usual, I want to hear from you guys, and I'm probably going to be discussing this with Akalon in this week's podcast. But until then, thank you all very much for watching. Do remember, check out Taliesin and Evitel. There's going to be a link in the description. I really enjoyed their show. I think they do a really good job. So, yeah. Thank you all for watching. See you guys in the next one. Stay strong. Stay safe. Peace out.